I am Siobhan Harlow, Professor Emerita of Epidemiology and Global Public Health, and Chair of the Wallenberg Medal Executive Committee. On behalf of the committee and the Nnimmo Human Rights Center, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 29th Wallenberg Medal and Lecture Ceremony that honors the University of Michigan's most distinguished alum, Raoul Wallenberg. Following presentation of the award and the medalist's lecture, we will have about 30 minutes for your questions. So first, I would like to acknowledge that we stand on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaapic, the Three Fires people, the Dawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, and to acknowledge that the University of Michigan resides, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from indigenous peoples. Tonight, we once again look to the past and to the future as we remember Raoul Wallenberg and as we honor the architect, poet, and environmental activist, Dr. Nnimmo Bassey. Raoul Wallenberg was born in 1912 to one of Sweden's most preeminent families. His grandfather encouraged him to study in America in order to open his horizons, and he enrolled at the University of Michigan in 1931. Far from the expectations of his family, his eminent family, he was a student of architecture and art, and at Michigan, Raoul was simply Rudy. While here, he traveled widely across the western US and Mexico and was a keen observer of nature's splendor. In a letter home, he wrote, "We started with the multicolored deserts. They consist of deserts within deserts that, because of the abundance of fossils from different periods, offer a range of colors, surpassing that of any rainbow." Graduating in 1935 with honors, he eventually joined a Swedish trading company owned by a Hungarian Jew for whom he traveled frequently to Budapest. With the onset of World War II, Sweden remained a neutral nation, and as Hungary had aligned with Germany, Budapest was home to the last large surviving Jewish population in Europe. However, on the 19th of March, 1944, the Nazis entered Budapest, and the restrictions of movement, ghettoization, and deportation of the Jewish population began. In short order, the Swedish legation and the Swedish Red Cross drew up over 700 visas and letters of protection, but tens of thousands awaited aid. So leaving the safety of Sweden and his promising career, on July 9th, 1944, Raoul Wallenberg stepped down from his train in Budapest and into his new role as a Swedish special diplomatic envoy. He was a creative and effective organizer, a visionary, and a skilled negotiator who dramatically scaled up the Swedish efforts. During the 6 months from July 44 to January 1945, through his boldness, defiance, courage, and imagination, Wallenberg is credited with saving over 100,000 lives. Yet, in January 1945, the Soviets, having liberated Budapest, arrested Raoul Wallenberg. Although never fully acknowledged by the Russian government, he is believed to have been imprisoned for years and to have died in the Russian Gulag. Wallenberg's courageous defiance against brutality and injustice and his fortitude in defense of human dignity remind us that no matter how formidable the odds, one person can make a difference in our struggle for a more just world. Tonight, we honor Dr. Nnimmo Bassey, who, like Wallenberg, trained as an architect. Yet upon seeing injustice, he dedicated his life to resisting the oil and gas extraction activities that destroy the environment and cause untold harm to the health and livelihoods of local peoples. He has become a leading environmental and climate activist, first in the Niger Delta and subsequently working across the African continent. Also a creative and effective organizer, he has a gift for envisioning alternatives and implementing at scale in defense of our Mother Earth, her peoples, and all living beings. So to begin our program tonight, we are honored to be joined by the Swedish Ambassador to the United States, His Excellency, Mr. Urban Ahlin, to help us remember Raoul Wallenberg's extraordinary courage and legacy. Mr. Ahlin.
Ladies and gentlemen, students of Ann Arbor, it is a true honor to be speaking to you today here in Ann Arbor, a place where Raoul Wallenberg, one of your most extraordinary alumni, once walked as a student, just like many of you. He sat in lecture halls, navigated campuses, campus life, and perhaps he even was stressed out over an exam or two. But Raoul Wallenberg went on to do something remarkable, something that continues to resonate deeply even today. So why are we remembering Raoul Wallenberg in 2024? Why should his story still matters to all of us, especially you, the students here in this room? Let's go back for a moment. Wallenberg was a Swedish diplomat who, during the World War II, made the choice to act when so many others turned away. In Budapest, he used his position not to protect himself, but to save tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews from the Holocaust. With courage, creativity, and unwavering commitment, he stood against tyranny, using the only weapons he had, diplomatic paperwork, forged passports, and safe houses. But you may be wondering, what does Wallenberg's story, incredibly as it is, have to do with me as a student here today? There are timeless lessons from Raoul Wallenberg's life that still hold meaning, and they offer us guidance in our own lives, no matter the time or place. Lesson 1. One person can make a difference. Wallenberg was not a world leader or a general. He was a student here, studying architecture, exactly like many of you. At that point in his life, he had no idea what he would later be called to save lives. Yet when faced with the overwhelming horrors of war and genocide, he stepped forward, driven by a deep sense of responsibility. His actions remind us that each of us, no matter our background or circumstance, can make a difference. We face significant challenges today, from climate change to social injustice, from global conflicts to mental health crisis. And it is easy to feel powerless in the face of such big issues. But Wallenberg's story shows us that even one person with courage to act can change the course of history. Lesson 2. Courage isn't always loud. Courage doesn't always come in the form of heroic battles or grand speeches. Wallenberg's courage was quiet but deeply impactful. He faced incredible personal risk, standing up to the Nazi regime, not with force, but with cleverness, diplomacy, and an unshakable moral compass. He knew the dangers, and yet he persisted, because standing on the sidelines was not an option for him. In your own lives, courage might look different. It might mean standing up for someone who is being treated unfairly, speaking out when you see injustice, or simply having the courage to take a path that others might not. Wallenberg's courage teaches us that doing the right thing often requires personal sacrifice, but it is always worth it. Lesson 3, empathy as a call to action. Wallenberg's deep empathy for those suffering is what drove him to act. He wasn't Jewish, nor did he have any personal connection to the people he was saving, but he didn't need a reason other than humanity. He saw people in desperate need and chose to use his skill and position to help them. In today's world, empathy is often seen as passive, something that is nice to have, but not necessarily powerful. But Wallenberg's life shows us the opposite. Empathy can be transformative. It is a force that compels us to act, to reach out, to intervene when we see suffering. In a world that is increasingly divided, his empathy is a model for all of us. It challenges us to step beyond our own experiences and act on behalf of others, even when we may not be directly affected. Lesson 4. Be resourceful in the face of obstacles. Wallenberg's resourcefulness was legendary. Under constant threat, with limited resources, he managed to devise creative and effective ways to protect the lives of those he was charged with saving. He created an enormous network of safe houses. He distributed an enormous amount of false passports, all while he was under the watchful eyes of the Nazi regime. We often think that we need perfect conditions to achieve great things. But Wallenberg reminds us that resourcefulness, finding solutions where no one seems to exist, is one of the greatest skills we can cultivate. Whether in our studies, our careers, or our personal lives, being adaptable, thinking creatively in the face of obstacles is often what makes the difference between success and failure. So why Wallenberg's legacy matters today? Raoul Wallenberg is not just a figure from the past. He is a role model for how to live with purpose and integrity in the face of darkness. His life reminds us that we don't need to wait for permission to do the right thing. We don't need to be in position of power to make a difference. And we certainly don't need to assume that someone else will step in to solve the problem that we see. In today's world, filled with headlines of conflict, division, and uncertainty, we need more people who embody Wallenberg's spirit, people who are willing to take a stand, to be courageous, to act with empathy, and to be resourceful when challenges arise. And those people are sitting right here. Students like you, who have the potential to carry forward these lessons into the future. So as you walk the same path here at the campus that Wallenberg once did, remember this: he once was in your shoes, unsure of where life would take him. And maybe, just maybe one day, someone will be giving a speech about how you changed the world too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those very inspiring words. Now, I would like to welcome to the podium Dr. Lori McCauley, the Provost of the University of Michigan, who will introduce Dr. Bassey and present him with the Wallenberg Medal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harlow, and thank you for your leadership of the Wallenberg Medal Executive Committee. You've brought us a phenomenal awardee this year. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to the University of Michigan. I also just want to express my gratitude. We are entirely grateful to our ambassador, Aline, for your inspiring remarks. Thank you so much for being here to celebrate the extraordinary contributions of Raoul Wallenberg and his living legacy at the University of Michigan. I'd also like to offer my gratitude to the donors who continue to ensure through the Wallenberg Medal and the Wallenberg Fellowship that we never forget Raoul Wallenberg's example, and even more, the simple, profound fact that one person can make an extraordinary difference in untold lives. Finally, I'd like to offer our deepest gratitude to the 2024 Wallenberg Medal recipient, architect, poet, and environmental activist, Dr. Nnimmo Bassey. Welcome to the University of Michigan, Dr. Bassey. Through your works and your words, you have reminded us again and again of the importance of climate action, sustainability, and environmental justice. You have shown us the necessity of not only seeing, but doing, of acting to address the climate crisis, the existential challenge of our time. Dr. Bassey, through your leadership of the Health of Mother Earth Foundation and on the steering committee of Oilwatch International, as well as your books and your works of poetry, you have shown us so much more. You've shown that together we can make a better world come alive, a green and growing world in which we are living in harmony with nature. And through offering every human being dignity and respect, living in harmony with one another. Climate action, sustainability, and environmental justice is one of the 4 key pillar impact areas of our Campus Vision 2034, and human health and well-being is another. As you have articulated so well, the two are inextricably interconnected. There are no borders between the wellness of ourselves and our communities, our climate, our global society, and the earth. The famous conservationist Rachel Carson once said, "Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure for as long as life lasts. In finding this strength, we are relatives." Dr. Bassey, thank you again for honoring us and showing us a path into beauty and the strength that blooms from it. I'm so delighted and honored to present you the Wallenberg Medal. Please join me.
I stand before you with a heart full of gratitude to the Provost, Dr. Siobhan, and the Wallenberg Committee, His Excellency the Ambassador, to great faculty and students that I've had the pleasure of meeting since I came in yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters, and relatives. It is indeed a great honor to receive this medal today. It is a very distinguished institution. It is gratifying to me to note that Wallenberg, in whose memory this medal is given, Studied architecture here at this university, graduating as part of the class of 1935. Too much cannot be said about his extraordinary service to humanity and the sacrifices he paid to accomplish what he did accomplish. And what he did accomplish cannot be matched. It's a privilege for me to share the same background of being an architect with him. However, what brings me into this space today is not the construction of physical structures, but the intersectionality, complexity, and measures of speciality and relationality. Since 1990, when the first medal was given, you have carefully highlighted the works of very distinguished individuals whose attainments dwarf whatever I may consider myself to have attained. It is with great humility that I stand before you all today. Permit me to also pay tribute to the great man, the late professor of the university, Bunyam Bryant, 1935 to 2024, who was instrumental in establishing the first environmental justice program and who stood as a great fighter against systemic racism and environmental hazards. It would have been a great privilege to have met him in person, but that wasn't to be. May he rest in power. I stand before you as a son of the earth, reminding myself that this reality holds true a long way before my nationality or race. Unlocking our ways of being can have a plurality of nuanced meanings, including who we are internally and who we are relationally as well. Our being is not bound by physical geographies or contrived boundaries, but by complex meanings and manifestations that can be sociocultural, historical, political, and spiritual. Being a son of the earth reminds me of a consciousness that requires an organic relationship with our mother, the earth, built with deference as an essential guardrail. It requires an understanding that every living being is a child of the earth, and that each has a role to play in this large family that we belong to. Selfish notions of accumulation by dispossession, oppression, control, and destruction causes ruptures that at best yield temporary benefits, but in the end hurt everyone. We are told that human beings make 0.01% of the biomass of living beings on Earth. But this reality has not made humans humble as we ought to be. But we're seeing a pettiness of racism, colonialism, and every other negative isms you can think of. It should be even more humbling when we realize that our bodies and their operations are controlled mainly by other communities of largely invisible beings in our guts and in other parts of our bodies. Now, looking beyond our bodies, we know that ants, earthworms, butterflies, bees, snakes, birds, and others play critical roles in maintaining the ecosystem balance that makes the Earth a planet in which we can live and thrive. Elimination of one species threatens the existence of others. We know all this, but acknowledging that we need one another is hard. Humans like to emphasize our differences, our uniqueness, our achievements, our influences as exceptional, extraordinary and distinguishing, to the extent that we consider ourselves not only superior to other beings, but also to other humans. Once some humans are considered as essentially others, or even subhuman, we eventually lose our own humanity. The predatory inclination of humans has over the years permitted obnoxious relationships that have manifested in exploitation of others as a norm. This experience is a scaffold on which the foundation of colonizing power structures were erected, and on which humans continue to cultivate imaginaries and tools that perpetuate extractivist, human-centric, and destructive living. This notion of otherness and superiority also makes it possible for humans to see Mother Earth as only suitable for exploitation and transformation for our own ease, irrespective of what it may mean to other beings. The right to transform nature presents Earth defenders as irritants and nuisances and makes the trampling on human rights an unavoidable necessity, unfortunately. The loss of sense of belonging to the community of beings, as well as being a part of the human family, numbs our sense and permits genocide, ethnocide, ecocide, and even terricide. On the other hand, when we realize that we are sons and daughters of the earth, this helps us to build deep connections to systems of knowledge, agency, authority, and practice that remind us that we are all interconnected and our destinies are bound together. Compassion towards our neighbors, our communities, and other beings bring out the spirit of sacrifice for which Raoul Wallenberg stands out. And indeed, this brings out the very best in us, emboldens us to act sacrificially, and shows clearly that love is a greater force than hate. The life of Raoul Wallenberg testifies to this. My work as an environmental justice campaigner has been based on the understanding that the polycrisis confronting us has roots in the geopolitical and socio-ecological frames within which we find ourselves. Seeking out those roots helps us to build and both to avoid superficial responses and to pursue real solutions, some of which may be unattainable in our lifetime. One of our key struggles has been to gain an understanding of the mindset that permits inequalities in our societies. The mindset that elevates might over care and love. The mindset that promotes the individual rather than the community. The mindset that refuses to understand that we are relatives. The mindset that grabs, trashes, and feeds on the misery of others. The mindset that permits environmental racism. Understanding the roots of the polycrisis helps us to see the phenomenon of expanding sacrifice zones in our world today. It also places on us the duty of standing with the oppressed to halt the expansion of those zones in Nigeria, in Africa, and everywhere they may manifest, by seeking to overcome the energy and other hegemonic transitions that sacrifice nature and are driven by colonial extractivism built on embedded geopolitical power imbalances that refuse to tilt the right way. The mindset that promoted this situation has been driven by greed, an elevated sense of entitlement to a life of ease and convenience. The outcome has been obvious. It's been odious eternal deaths and the rise of fiction, an overarching canvas in the climate change discourse, where the focus has been on atmospheric carbon molecules and not on what happens to humans and other relatives in the places where fossil fuel is extracted. Climate negotiations themselves have become it has revealed a willful blindness to the fact that the world is facing a global problem. And many fail to see that while the crisis is literally fueled by humans, it is multifaceted and affects all beings and not just humans. The Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change appears to annually transition itself into a mere carbon trade fair than much else. It was not until the 28th COP, Conference of Parties, that an agreement was reached concerning the need to transition from fossil fuels as an energy source. This was loudly applauded as an achievement, even though it is well known that the burning of fossil fuels is the primary cause of global warming or global burning, as the case may be. At the same time, we are seeing more investments in fossil fuels rather than less. And of course, fossil fuel companies are making inordinate profits, and the world is plunged into extreme weather events, and as fence-line communities wallow in indescribable levels of ecological damage. Rich polluting nations and corporations continue to do their best to avoid any notion of justice in climate negotiations. Whereas once there was a common but differentiated responsibilities principle, now it's a word that rarely appears in the documents. And those who did most to create the problem struggle continuously to do the least to tackle that problem. But at the end, we are all relatives on the same blue home floating in space. There is a lack of readiness to provide access to the things that would help us combat global warming, like technology and finance, even though this would benefit everyone. I have the example of what happened during COVID-19, when there was a hoarding of vaccines and refusal to share technologies, as though there were concrete boundaries between nations and between peoples about what causes COVID-19 and who would survive and who should die. The problem is that money has been used as a measure of considering value in relationships. And so if I'm going to be your relative, there's a monetary value that's placed to that disposition before it becomes important. If I cannot meet that level of financial contribution, then of course, my value as a relative diminishes. And I could be disposed of, dispensed of, or discounted. Researchers like Fadel Kaboub have pointed out that the global financial architecture is wired in such a way that $2 trillion flows from the global south to the global north every year through exports, imports, interest payments, illicit financial flows, and the like. The skewed financial flows are powered by a colonial economic system overseen by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, both created in colonial days for colonial purposes. Climate finance, the Agreed Climate Fund, and the Loss and Damage Fund may be seen as efforts to move in the right direction of the global financial flows. But with $2 trillion moving to the north, what is coming to the south as climate finance hardly adds up to $100 billion. And about $12 billion trickles in as climate fund. The Loss and Damage Fund itself is not able to rise up to the $1 billion mark. I'm mentioning this so that we can see the hypocrisy in the global coming together to tackle a global problem. Interestingly, the basis for the visible and insidious disparities is often shoved out of sight. Explanations traceable to slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and related political and economic subversions are not often accepted as the basis for the persistent geopolitical inequalities that we have in our world today. And this clearly shows to me that it's obvious that many do not agree that we are relatives. Rather than work on multiple transitions towards a post-petroleum civilization, the world is stuck with a sole focus on an energy transition. Even this energy transition is largely one of shifting from fossil fuel-based energy sources to what is termed renewable or clean sources. Without a common understanding of what is renewable, the expansion of sacrifice zones is being promoted in extracting critical minerals and displacing millions of hapless brothers and sisters in territories where lithium and other so-called critical minerals are being extracted. Examples include the lithium triangle in Latin America, where thousands of gallons of water, scarce resource, is being used to process this clean, critical mineral. It's also in the same way that we look at what is going on in the Congo, the Democratic Republic, where cobalt is extracted and millions are displaced. Now, just talking about Congo reminds me of a speech that was made by Malcolm X in Detroit on 17 January 1961. He was then analyzing the crisis in the Congo and the intervention of international forces that led to the assassination of the first Prime Minister of Congo in January 1961. And as he was speaking about the Congo, people were just looking at him and saying, "Oh, Congo, where is that?" And he said, "You look more Congolese than the Congolese." In other words, we could all be Congolese if we realize that we are relatives. Change is often painful, and unwillingness to suffer discomfort has led people to resist any change from the status quo if it benefits them. However, resistance to change often needs scapegoats, and these are not hard to find. As positions harden, ideologies become more extreme, and others are seen as usurpers of benefits that should be enjoyed by the disgruntled. And this is why the rise of xenophobia and anti-immigrant postures has turned virulent in today's world. Is this inevitable? Perhaps not. Resisting change because one has the power to do so creates more fissures in society, and pent-up anger eventually bursts in ways that are not desirable. We can see this happening in the debate over the urgency of transiting from fossil fuels. For example, the proposal for managed decline of dependence on the energy source have been resisted by those who insist that dirty energy will remain the dominant energy source beyond this century. The wisdom in such a position includes the politically beautiful claim that Africa must use fossil fuels to develop whether the West likes it or not. I mean, I like that argument, but it doesn't really work, because you have to first define what is development, you have to define what is energy, you have to define what is that future you want to construct before you depend on a source that led the world to the brink as we have gotten to today. What should be our reaction considering the objective realities? My response to this question is that we must first be critically aware of our individual realities and from there examine collective realities. In the words of Stephanie Mills in her book, Tough Little Beauties, her words resonate with me here. She wrote, where one is greatly influences who one is, for better or worse. Degraded places sap souls. She captured the harsh reality that we can only ignore to our peril. Now let me shift to my reality where I come from and where I grew up in, which is in Niger Delta of Nigeria. For over 30 years, I've been as an activist, either for human rights or environmental rights. And the more I work in this field, the more it becomes clear to me that denying any human right is a threat to life generally. It's a denial of life generally. It doesn't need to be called right to life. Polluted environment deny us the right to life. And I've also come to see that environmental abuse deeply negates that right. And my journey on the struggle to justice was bettered in the autocratic regime of military dictatorship in my country, Nigeria. The inexorable move into the struggle for socio-ecological justice grew from an awareness that our individual liberties mean little when our relationship with Mother Earth is shattered by pollution of our water, our land, and the air we breathe. It was with this realization that Ken Saro-Wiwa, a man that inspired me greatly to be an activist and who was executed by the Nigerian state in 1995, while in prison not knowing whether he would come out alive or not, wrote a poem which he titled, "Keep Out of Prison." It was advice that his parents told him whenever they visited him in detention. Do everything to keep out of prison. But he was there, and he never came out alive from that imprisonment. He wrote, "Keep out of prison." I would just like to read. It's a very short poem. He said, "Keep out of prison," he wrote. "Don't get arrested anymore. But while the land is ravished and our pure air poisoned, when streams choke with pollution, silence would be treason, punishable by term in prison." Now that line, "silence will be treason," has triggered and empowered a lot of activists not to be silent in the face of tyranny, not to be silent in the face of environmental degradation, and not to be silent when their life is threatened by those who search for profit and nothing more. And so that word echoes continually in my head, in my mind, and in the fields that we work. Silence in the face of tyranny could be treason to the right of others. Now, all the things that Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni people complain about were captured. A lot of it was captured in the Ogoni Bill of Rights published in 1990, submitted to the Nigerian government, which never got a response, even as we speak today. The response to be awaited, but the Ogoni people achieved something. By 1993, they expelled Shell Oil Company from their territory and all the other polluters. And up to this moment, those oil wells have remained shut, even though the pipelines are still leaking crude into the environment. But to see that the people united can stop certain powerful forces from operating their territory is something that encourages us. Because then, when we stand together against this kind of negative forces, we show that we are relatives. Now, the complaints of the Ogoni people were eventually validated by United Nations Environment Program when they carried out an environmental assessment of Ogoni land and showed that pollution was so deep at some places up to 5 meters into the soil. And the report was issued in 2011. By 2016 or thereabout, when cleanup began, we found that the pollution had gone as deep as 10 meters, which is about 30 feet into the ground. And of course, the atmosphere is polluted by gas flaring, waters are polluted by oil spills, and in some parts of the Niger Delta, there's an oil spill every 12 hours. And some places, oil spills are occurring continuously. There's a well that blew up in May 2020, blew up in the shallow continental shelf. It's been burning and spilling for more than 4 years, something that could be stopped in less than 6 weeks, according to experts. And so we have a situation where the pursuit of capital and displays of power would allow whole environments and livelihoods to be sacrificed without any sense of responsibility. I could say more, but let me come down to the philosophy that really, really empowers work in this kind of difficult situation. And one of the key philosophies that empowers some of us is the African philosophy of Ubuntu, meaning that our humanity is intricately connected. I am human because you are human. My humanity is identified in your humanity. And in my language, which is Ibibo, one of the minor languages in Nigeria, we have 250 languages, by the way. In my language, we call it Etiwem, which means good living. And this talks about our interconnectedness, our being relatives, realizing that what happens to one affects the other, and that living the good life is not measured by how much wealth you have, how much power you have, or what your status in life may be, but about how well you relate, not just to your neighbor that you can see, but the other neighbors who are invisible, who are nevertheless our relatives. Understanding that the web of life is so intricate and helps us to understand that we are not apart from nature, but that we are a part of nature, and we don't own any part of her. We belong to the earth. We are the earth. We are the land. And we are the water. We are the mountains. That's what a friend of mine told me recently in South Africa, where we went to visit one place, the cradle of humanity. Very cool spring with rocks. And he told me, this mountain, we are the mountains. And I believe that we are the mountains indeed. We are the earth. We are not separate from her. So the vision of the earth as our mother is what powered my organization, the Health of Mother Earth Foundation, for us to see that for us to have an ecological just world, we have to work to ensure that every being exists in harmony with Mother Earth. And to drive this vision, we work to build ecological knowledge, propagate resource democracy, and support wholesome, socio-ecologically cohesive communities where people live in solidarity and in dignity. Our work highlights our connectedness to the earth, our communities, and all beings. Standing apart never works in sustainable and enduring ways. The lack of respect for our connectedness has given rise to a twisted and narrow national consciousness to promote an exclusionary or xenophobic nationalism. The spirit of selfishness builds individualism, projects a curious sense of otherness, and blunts relationality. The obvious outcome is that humanity is drifting out of our collective minds. We are losing our sense of memory. We are actually losing our mind when we forget that we are living in a limited planet and that we can't enlarge this blue planet, as I said earlier on. So our core knowledge sharing space, amongst other things, we march on the streets, we work with communities, but the key thing we do, which is what I believe is done in this great university, is the knowledge space of generating knowledge and sharing knowledge. And one of the key tools is our schools of ecology, where youths, academics, and others get to learn about the components of the polycrisis confronting our world. They offer us platforms to interrogate the roots of problems rather than the symptoms. They help us instigate and build a core of activist academics and intellectual militants. To overrun the oppressive and destructive systems require sharpened imaginations, and the schools provide the tools for making this happen. To further that part, we seek collaborations and exchanges with credible institutions such as yours. And at this point, I offer an invitation to all of you to come visit us in Nigeria. I should not end this lecture without mentioning the regional initiatives that arose from our schools of ecology effort. In 2022, We hosted the Maiden Niger Delta Socio-Ecological Alternative Convergence, and that convergence brought together all social forces, including youths, women, politicians, academics, traditional rulers, leaders, civil society, and others to interrogate the roots of the crisis that has exposed and made the Niger Delta a wasteland. At the end of the day, a Niger Delta Alternative Manifesto was adopted for advocacy and for action. 3 editions later, the movement is getting stronger, and the demands of the manifesto is guiding debates as well as advocacy for change. In June this year, we elevated the Niger Delta Convergence to the national level when we hosted the first ever National Socio-Ecological Alternatives Convergence. And this convergence took hard looks at the diverse socio-ecological challenges in Nigeria and came up with a national charter of demands for ecological transformation. While these streams of work will continue, we are in consultation. We are in consultation with brothers and sisters in other African countries to bring to bear an African socio-ecological alternatives convergence for transformation at a pan-African level. We understand that this is very essential because geographies must not be permitted to divide us or expose us to unbridled exploitation and ecological devastation. Brothers and sisters, we are surrounded by relatives. And some of these relatives are invisible. Understanding this fact became very clear to me during the COVID-19 pandemic, when suddenly we had to wear masks because of relatives that we couldn't see. We had to keep social distances. We had to change the way we do things because we knew that there were other beings that were not visible to us and that they were acting in ways that could imperil our own health and lives. Now, that understanding led me to write the poem titled, I See the Invisible, which is the title poem of my latest poetry collection. And if you permit me, I want to conclude by reading that poem. I will almost conclude by reading that poem. I see the invisible, I hear the inaudible, and I feel the intangible. I'm everywhere in no time, floating on memories of strained futures, aloft in lofty hopes, sliding on rugged dreams in truncated nights. I see the invisible, I hear the inaudible, and I feel the intangible. Ears on the ground, we tremble at the departing footsteps of departed elders in marketplaces. I see the invisible, I hear the inaudible, and I feel the intangible. Eyes on the past, we see the future, cluttered by discarded viruses and other angry relatives. Hands glued to our sides, social distances narrowed to 1 kilometer apart. I see the invisible, I hear the inaudible, and I feel the intangible. We have never been closer than now that we are apart. Finally, nature's tiny beings shake sleep away. We are relatives and can have a good day if we don't scoff and cough in each other's face. Humans need to be humble. And of course, the title of this talk is from that poem, We Are Relatives. Humans need to be humble, recognize our connectivity, break down apartheid walls, and be grateful for the privilege of sharing the same planet. We must stand in solidarity, learn from the selfless services of Raoul Wallenberg, immerse ourselves in struggles for liberty, dignity, and life of our relatives. Together, we can break walls, march forward using cultural tools, share laughter, and even storms and stories, and by so doing, organize those universal tools that we need to erase the prevailing pains in today's world. And today I pledge to continue working for power from below and to stress the urgent need to globalize social justice, because we cannot build this needed change one territory at a time. We require collective global action. If capital could be globalized, hope should equally be globalized, as Lavia Campesina says. I thank you for permitting me to remind us today that we are all relatives. Yes, we are all relatives. I thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Steve Ratner. I am a professor at the University of Michigan Law School, and I have the privilege to be the director of the University of Michigan's Donia Human Rights Center. The Donia Human Rights Center is the university's focal point for the study and teaching of human rights. We have a variety of important programming, from speaker series to undergraduate fellows to summer internships to graduate student funding, with, we hope, even more exciting programming in the future. For the last 2 years, we have also been the administrative home of the Raoul Wallenberg Medal. And so I'm delighted to take this opportunity to lead the question and answer of our distinguished speaker. And I'd like to thank Nnimmo for a talk that is going to inspire us for a long time, and that I know will inspire the people in our audience with some questions for our last half hour. I also want to acknowledge Bob Donia and Jane Ritter, who are the benefactors of the Donia Human Rights Center, who have enabled us to accomplish so much in our rather short history. So we're going to be having a question and answer period for roughly 25 minutes. And if you have questions, there will be people, staff, who are going to be wandering with microphones. I'd ask you to keep your question on the brief side, focus on the question, and that will allow us to cover a lot of ground over the next 25 minutes. I would like to start the questioning, however, with giving the first question to a member of our Wallenberg Medal Executive Committee, which is the committee that selects the medalist each year. And so our first question is going to come from Colin Sullivan, who is a graduate student, the graduate student member of the committee, and is a PhD student in our Department of Political Science. So Colin, why don't you get us started?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your remarks. I think it's really uncommon to come across a person that has a background that you have. You're a poet, you're an architect, you're a human rights defender, and an environmental activist. And I have to think that those things sort of inform each other and sort of influence the way that you think about things. And I'm really curious if you could speak for a couple of minutes about the ways that your poetry and your training in architecture maybe influence your approach to activism, or the way that your activism and training in architecture influence your writing and your poetry, and just sort of the ways that those different parts of you inform and influence each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Architecture, poetry, activism, to me, are all interconnected, because architects are activists. Because the spaces that architects design affects people's behavior, their comfort levels, And buildings could actually moderate the way what you do in a particular space. And so apart from a socio-ecological and cultural relationship with spaces, architects can really, if they are conscious, socially conscious, can use the designs and buildings to make things happen, to make people behave in a particular way. But you know, I see poetry, I see architecture as poetry in concrete. Just walking around this university campus, I hear the building speaking to me, giving me different stories, different significance about what society should be, what the community is. And so apart from buildings or architecture being poetry in concrete, poetry itself is a very excellent tool for activism. My poems are usually often written to provoke action, to get people to change a particular position to another position, to try to capture what may not be able to capture except you write a whole book, and then a poem is condensed into just a few lines. And so it's a privilege to be able to capture words, capture a lot of concepts with a few words, and then to be able to march with that. And I do not think that protest, for example, or other activities, direct action, other action can be done without poetry. And this is why we have some people say, well, your poems sound like slogans, why not? A slogan is a beautiful tool. And it's something memorable, things that we can remember. Just like the most popular songs are simple songs that have words that people can easily remember, can relate to, and can work with. And so yes, the whole poetry, architecture, activism, to me, are all interconnected. We do write some for people to cry about, to get angry, to do work. We do also create some for people to read and enjoy and laugh. Because the most difficult job becomes easier if you do it with some joy and laughter.
Thank you. Okay, we have one more reserved question, which is for a student from the Ann Arbor Public Schools. Maisie Waying, are you near a microphone? Okay, Maisie, yeah.
Dr. Bassey, thank you so much for your lecture and congratulations. My name is Maisie and I'm a high school student passionate about environmental advocacy. Throughout your career, you have effectively voiced your opinion and beliefs to a variety of different audiences and people. When it comes to activism, what is your advice for activists when it comes to speaking with people in positions of power who may have, for some reasons, whether it be political, personal, or financial, for not taking bold actions towards sustainability, and how do you communicate with these types of people?
Oh my goodness. Well, sometimes we have to learn to be polite. So this is why I love the United Nations. Even if you make a speech, they're insulting everybody, they still give you an applause at the end of it, because they're all diplomats. So, it can be very annoying indeed to find people who know the truth but would not admit it, or they're willingly doing what is very destructive to others because they have the power to do it. So the activists must be bold to speak up, no matter who gets offended. Because if you don't speak up, of course, Ken Saro-Wiwa said silence would be treason. We need to speak up to be true to our consciences and not sugarcoat anything, just say it as it is. That's what I do. And of course, I know that some people will not be happy. No matter what you do, some people will not be happy. So you have to understand that if you don't say what needs to be said, it may never be said. And then what you have not said could be what is needed to bring about change. So when you are convicted of your convictions, please stand by it and say it out.
Thank you. Okay, so at this point, if you have a question, raise your hand and one of our microphone runners will find you. If you could just identify yourself, and if that's okay, if you could also mention your affiliation, whether you're a student or a community member or some other connection, and we will get started. Yes, right there.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Dr. Bassey, for a very moving talk and life. My name is Catherine Badgley. I'm a professor here at the university and director of the residential college across the street. I love your theme, We Are Relatives, and I am curious about what you might have to say to those of us who are teachers here at the university about how we can incorporate that message in our teaching, no matter what subject we teach.
Well, this is a university campus, so difficult questions.
We didn't say it would be
I'm
easy.
certainly going to go. Well, I think the concept of being relatives is something that is universal. You find it in different cultures. The First Nation people say this in many different ways. And, you know, when we accept that we are sons and daughters of the soil, we are saying that we're all relatives. And, you know, no matter what is being taught, whatever subject the academics handle, I believe every subject that would be of benefit to humanity must be in service of humanity. Not necessarily just humanity, but the service of Mother Earth, something that does not disrupt the cycles of nature. So there would be spaces and approaches that can be used at all times to teach sustainability. Sustainability, to me, is being in harmony with nature. Because no matter what you do, if you are not in harmony with nature, what you are doing may last a few years, may last 1,000,000 years, at the end is going to fail. And so that to me would be the entry point. Whether you're teaching law, you're teaching sustainability, you're teaching space, science, or whatever, it's got to be a point where we realize that we are all relatives. It's a kind of a call for humility, that we don't know more than nature. We don't know more than Mother Earth. The insects that we tread upon are so essential to our survival. The butterflies, the bees. You know, if people understand that although humans can carry pollen grains from one flower to the other one, the bees do it better. They don't charge us for it. And we know that they provide this service free of charge, then we should know that we have good, caring relatives.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's a question in the second floor. I can't see, is the questioner, if you could stand closer to the glass partition so we can see you? Is there? Oh, but not with. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Ani bonjour. Firstly, I want to say miigwech. Can you hear me good?
Yes.
Okay. Ani bonjour. Vincent Deshnika. So my name is Vincent. Miigwech. Thank you for coming to the heart of Turtle Island to visit and talk to us. So a question I do have is that from so my affiliation. I last year graduated from the School for Environment and Sustainability here on campus, and I currently am a researcher at the Graham Sustainability Institute. And a question I do have is that from my indigenous studies and my collaboration with tribes here in what is now known as Michigan, there's been a critique about Western's connections to place in terms of like, it's very common for Westerners to connect through Mother Nature and abstract concepts as opposed to place-based identities. And then there's critiques that this type of connection leads to people deciding to manage lands and waters that are far away from their current homes, and that leads to like the concept of green colonialism. And one example of this is like with forest conservation that has occurred here in Turtle Island, in which you had urban Westerners essentially send the military to take out tribes from their native homes in order to, quote, preserve the environment or protect the pristineness. So I do admire that you're promoting this concept of us all being relatives. But I guess my question is like, how do we ensure that we promote this, that like the good side of us being relatives, while mitigating the impacts of green colonialism and like related consequences?
Thank you very much. Yes, please. Go ahead, give a round of applause. Because that was both a question and a comment. So thank you so much for the comment, and for the question aspect, is something that is very, very critical, because green colonialism is real and is driven by the same forces that has always driven colonialism, which means extractivism, basically. This is what is blunting the distinction between clean and dirty energy, because if it still has the platform, still works on the basis of that kind of relationship. And you mentioned the concept of conservation, what some researchers call fortress conservation, where external forces believe that they know better how to conserve environment, to conserve the forest, the savanna, and then locals are not allowed to interact with the environment the way that sustains their livelihoods and their living and their culture. Somebody else has a better idea on how to conserve that location. This is something that has been discredited and is persisting because of the unjust geopolitical relationships and the power of capital, of course. So yes, we fundamentally, we should encourage ourselves to continuously understand that those who live in a location, who live in a territory, who have interacted with the territory for hundreds, thousands of years, know the best way to preserve that territory. They know the best way to manage the resources. They know the best way to keep things in balance. And anything else is just a way of exploitation, and it has been called that straight out. You can't find a better word for it. Anything that disrupts the rights of Mother Earth. This is why in 2010, there was a conference on climate change and the rights of Mother Earth in Cochabamba, Bolivia. And the major element of that, the right of Mother Earth, is that Mother Earth must not, the natural cycles of Mother Earth must not be disrupted by human or activities, and that we have also responsibilities. So we have a responsibility to allow nature be nature. We also have a responsibility to allow those who know best to manage the environment for their benefit and the benefit of our relatives to do so. I think that's where we respond to the great point and comment that you made. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Yes, over there. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Bassey. My name is Laura. I'm a community organizer here in Ann Arbor, and I organize young people with wealth around wealth redistribution. And it really struck me, the quote from Ken Saro-Wiwa's poem about "my parents told me not to get arrested." Because the young people I organize are also conscious of what their parents think about the decisions they want to make. And our parents, more than any other factor, shape how we redistribute our money, what generosity means to us, what it means to give, what it means to be interconnected to others. It's our parents that shape that idea. And so I'm curious, you're a climate warrior, you are an environmental activist, you more than most people know that this is an intergenerational battle. How do we bring the generations together, especially those people who are our biological relatives? Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up that question. Clearly, this is an intergenerational struggle, and we can only build a sane, beautiful future by working with that realization. And one thing I tell my children is for them to be conscious of the fact that it's by being close to nature that they get educated. Schooling is good, but our education goes beyond the school. It goes on to our connection to the land, which actually gives us the tools for survival and to leave the earth a better place than we have met it. I think also it requires a lot of humility for adults, for parents to realize that our kids have, they have maybe even a greater stake in what we do today, because they would bear the consequences much longer. Because where some of us are coming from is much longer than where we're going to, physically speaking. And so we just need to be more humble. Young people should be more on the driving seat of decision making. But unfortunately, what we see in the world today is a closure, the shrinking of that space, and a kind of discounting of the efforts of young people to step forward. But we should be encouraged rather than discouraged. And there's a lot of the young, one of the things that adults are afraid of, just like rich people are afraid of poor people, adults are not so comfortable with young people. Because young people communicate in a different way, they think in a slightly different way, and they do things in a different way. In my organization, we place a lot of emphasis in bridging this gap by, one thing we do is by having sessions of learning from the wise. And so usually we use elders who are wisdom holders, knowledge holders, to speak about their own life to young people. And so young people could see them and treat them as living ancestors, not dead ones. And so they learn from them, and then they aspire to be like these parents, these fathers and mothers. And then also we encourage young people to organize on their own and permit adults to be spectators for once. And that way young people express themselves in the best ways they can. And they do things that are I find myself like going to school all over again whenever I sit back and listen to young people. And the more I watch young people do things, the more I get to believe that maybe I've done what I needed to do, and I should allow them to do the rest. But it's not easy to step back, but we need to be their cheerleaders and just keep encouraging them and working with accompanying them, because, of course, because we've been young before, we have more experience than them because they've never been old before.
Thank you. Yes. Is that upstairs? Yes, upstairs. Yep.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today and for your lecture and for taking our questions. My name is Nora Langat. I'm a third-year history PhD student studying African history. And my question is to do with Ken Saro-Wiwa's death and how change over time has happened in terms of African activism in Nigeria, particularly because you use the same tools as he did, and you essentially are working along the similar issues that he did. So whether it's the reception of environmental activism, whether it's tools of environmental activism, how would you say it has changed over time since Ken Saro-Wiwa's death? Thank you.
Okay. Well, as I said, Ken Saro-Wiwa inspired me a great deal. I knew him as a person, and I knew him as a writer, as an activist, and his execution was totally devastating. But one thing is that he was so conscious of what he was campaigning for, and he was a man who documented a lot of things. He wrote a lot of books. He wrote fiction. He wrote drama. He wrote script for TV. He wrote poems, of course. And he was a communicator. And those tools have helped us and other activists, upcoming activists, to learn to be in the mind of this great man who lived so sacrificially. And, for his sacrifice, activism has been better off, because it's clear to everyone that you have to make the maximum demand. Like Che Guevara said, be reasonable, demand the impossible. So we see that he did what he did not see the solutions, but now what he did, although he died in the process, what he did is driving the change that we have now. So we're all standing on his shoulders, and things are different because he was working in a context where many people did not understand what he was saying. But now what he said is validated by scientists, by experience, by all things happening around us, and more people are willing to speak up, more people are ready to step forward to litigate, and people are watchdogs over the environment. There's hardly any environmental incident that will occur anywhere in the territories where his influence is very rich that people will not report, especially using social media, within the next few minutes. So things have changed in the ways of communication, but the fundamentals are built upon what foundation he led.
Okay, thank you. Yes, in the back. Yep, in the back of the lower level. Yes.
Hello, I am Sukpal. Thank you very much for your lecture. My question for you is, assuming that our system of capital is based on the exploitation of the material and now even the exploitation of the psychic, resulting in dissections of the anima or spirit from the earth or the spirit from the self, what measures can we take or how can we act in a way to devalue these idioms of exploitation that are surrounding our systems of capital? Or how do you see this devaluation playing out in the future?
Oh, wow, I wish you didn't add that last part. I was about to answer the first part of the question and you added that part. Well, so thank you so much for that question. I think it, of course, the dependence on capital as the fundamental for relationship for actions, especially in climate change, has given birth to a lot of false solutions, including carbon trading, carbon offsetting, so-called net zero that is not zero, and all those kind of arguments. And of course, people feel proud that they are contributing financially to tackling the problem. And of course, the whole idea of green economy too, that is gaining, instead of being discredited, is gaining more grounds. And basically, is that you have to put financial value to the services of nature, so-called ecosystem services. I say so-called respectfully, because really there's ecosystem services, but placing financial value becomes problematic. And how are we going to that unless we make conscious effort to change that mindset, that imaginary, it's unfortunately going to keep on unfolding that way. And then false solutions will continue to be enthroned. There are many solutions that are being proposed today when everybody knows it's not going to work, but because it allows for investment, allows for employment, allows for movement of capital, then these are promoted. And so it's just going to take more work to expose the fallacy of this position, and also to train, to work with, to learn, and it goes back to the new generation, the upcoming generation, to have their mindsets liberated from from being captured by this sense of capital being the master of everything. And I recently, again, I was in a wilderness school, in a bush school in South Africa, and a place where young people were meeting to discuss, just what needs to be done to bring about change, to share a sense of conservation, sense of protection, sense of enhancing, allow nature to be herself. And if we multiply these senses by having nodes around the world, where young people can really experiment and learn to live with nature and to think in a different way rather than about how to the elements of aggrandizement and power and all that. We realize, come back to, I believe we come to a balance, a situation where a new imaginary will take over. The stories we tell, the songs we sing, the poems we share would be things that would help us to do things differently. If we don't do that, we're still going to be dancing to the wrong beat.
Unfortunately, our question, we have to wrap up for today. I see there are a couple of hands, and I would encourage you to just informally ask Mr. Bassey after the talk, but we do have to wrap up. And what a great question and answer session it was, and to hear from such a diverse group of stakeholders around the campus, from faculty to students to alumni to community members. And thank you all for those very, very stimulating questions. I would just like to conclude by thanking the leadership of the university for helping to make this happen. Provost Macaulay, our Vice Provost for Sustainability and Climate Action Baker, our LSNA Dean Sabello, the Ross Dean Matusik, and the other members of the Wallenberg Committee, many of whom are here today. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us, for making the trip from Washington, for your truly inspiring remarks about the legacy of Raoul Wallenberg. And of course, thank you to our speaker, Nnimmo Bassey, for your remarks. I'd also like to thank our two ASL interpreters, Matthew Butler and Melissa Fiore. Thank you very much for your excellent work. And the funding for our event accessibility was provided by the Faculty and Staff Disability Navigators in the DEI office of the LSNA. And I'd also like to thank all the people behind the scenes who make something like this come together, the Global Projects Cluster, the LSNA advancement staff, the Ross School of Business staff, and of course, in the leadership roles of the Wallenberg Medal, Siobhan Harlow, the chair of our executive committee, and Rachel Levy, the program associate who works with Siobhan to make our selection process and medal award ceremony go so smoothly. Thank you to all of you for making this such a wonderful annual event.